Germination is a professional development project for early childhood educators, emerging artists and musicians. Through playful workshops, work-based experiences, and with the support of a mentor, Magic Acorns has been learning about how we can support and nurture creative practitioners in musical play. In this episode, Dr. Jessica Pitt talks to colleague at the Royal College of Music, Dr. Mary Stakelum, about their thoughts and reflections on the Germination project.
Well, welcome everyone to our Germination podcast series. I'm delighted that in this episode, a critical friend and a colleague of mine, Dr. Mary Stakelum, joins us to share her impressions and reflections as a visitor to the Germination project. So it's wonderful that you're here, Mary, on actually what is quite a sunny day where I am. I don't know what it's like where you are.
Thank you very much, Jess. It's actually not a bad day, and some birds twittering in the background, so hopefully they'll be a nice accompaniment. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me to offer my impressions and reflections on this project. And I know we're going to cover an awful lot in this session, but maybe I'll just start by saying why I'm so interested in this, because as you mentioned in your introduction, we're colleagues, which is wonderful, and I get an insight in our discussions on early years, early childhood and music education, and actually, renew my interest and my own passion in learning, and the importance of always being kind of open and aware of changing and understanding what I do as a learner and the assumptions I have. So I found it incredibly rich just to have a look and sort of be a fly on the wall at Germinations, because again, it just reminded me of the importance of education, but also about my own formation, so to speak, and why am I the way I am? Why do I believe about what beliefs I have about music and music education? And a lot of it is about unlearning what I do as an adult. And I know we've talked about this as well, but this project just is a reminder of the fact that there's a point when we can kind of create what the world that we want our young people to grow up in, musically and otherwise. And so that's why I was really so blown away by some of the things I've seen, if I'm honest, and I hope we get a chance to chat through them over the course of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's so wonderful to be able to discuss things with a critical friend. Not that my, wonderful artist colleagues on the project aren't also critical friends, but to have that slightly detached view has been really incredibly useful to me. And I suppose my passion for this work arises from working for many years with young children and adults, and knowing that actually practice needs a shift somehow. And I think all of us in the Magic Acorns team have become aware that we need to be growing up the next generation of early childhood music artists musicians and artists, and actually to try to influence practice as well on the ground somehow. And so this project has really been born for that understanding or knowledge that actually who are the people who are going to step into our shoes, and what sort of formation, training do they need? It's not training people to work in a primary school. It's training musicians and artists to work in a play-based curriculum. So that's really at the heart of what this project is about. So maybe it would be lovely to hear your immediate reactions and thoughts emerging from just dwelling and visiting the project so far.
Yeah, well, the first thing that struck me was just the vulnerability. When I was watching the videos, I saw adults sort of trusting each other in ways, and I know they're coming from different disciplines, which is, I think, also really interesting to see how they kind of interact. But the fact that they opened up, or they allowed themselves the possibility to kind of be vulnerable in a place. They were adults, but they were taking on the attributes of children in this playful way, and I found myself sort of a little bit. I was just conscious that, wow, this is just a place of vulnerability. That was my immediate idea, and then I cherished it all the more because I went in there and that I could feel the trust building up. I mean, these were just been little snapshots that I saw of I think it was the play days, and sort of the way in which the training was framed. But that was my first idea, that wow, well done, you are still interested and open to learning and putting yourself into that position of risk. I suppose they were up for taking the risk. So, and then I was looking at some of the reflections, and I saw that played out, and actually they were aware of it. For some of probably less certain ground than for others, and I found that really, I suppose, refreshing. But it was the honesty as well, and their self-awareness. But it was, I suppose, their willingness to get in there and open themselves up to this possibility, where actually they didn't necessarily know the end product, and that was okay. So that was one of the things that struck me. And just reading through the reflections as well, I was really interested and fascinated by this idea of the labeling myself as a musician, and being aware of in a sense that was a hindrance, or it was baggage. I mentioned my own introduction to myself, this idea of having to unlearn all the time, and this was it writ large. Being aware of, I'm a musician, but sometimes actually that's not really helpful, because that sets up expectations that I should be doing things, and I think somehow we've got to have a look at this. We just got to look at why is it's the case that being a musician sometimes is a hindrance in the education sector, so they were my immediate responses, and I mean the other thing that stuck out for me was the what I would say was a really profound moment of communication and community and trust building again, was the collective singing. I think it wasn't necessarily singing, it just emerged sounding together, and I thought, that was just, I could feel it, that the authenticity and the vulnerability again, and the trust that just letting yourself do that. I just think that, I wish we could do that more often. There's so many places that allow themselves to do that, but we spend our time kind of whooshing through them from one meeting to another. Sometimes I'd love to commandeer a space and just do that very thing, because wow, any stage, it has got to be such a human thing.
And so much of those events happening are bounded in a way by the way they're introduced and the way they're sort of prompted. So the prompts for these activities were offered in such a way that it felt very sort of safe, in a sense, so that I think that particular activity, if I recall, was introduced by, let's sing the stairwell. We'll just go into the stairwell and just open your mouth and hum or make a sound, and then make another sound, and then breathe and make another sound. And I think that, just that, to make it sort of achievable for those who might not feel themselves to be musical or to have a voice. I think it's something about, and I know we've discussed this in the past, it goes back to the sort of early years foundation stage overarching principles, in a way, of an enabling environment. And what can that look like for a sort of training or a day which people are going to spend together to learn and understand in such a way that it enables. It enables staying with, I think staying with the awkwardness was one of the things that we spoke about. And, you know, what are the parameters for that? How is that offered? And how is that sort of held and supported so that people can have this open-ended experience?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You reminded me indeed of that idea of the awkwardness, which was, you know, again, it was something that I saw, and perhaps that's the word that I was. That's how I would articulate what I was witnessing. But it was okay when I realized that it was held, and I love that phrase, holding the space. That those people knew that it was okay, and actually they probably didn't feel awkward, but I think in some of the reflections they did point to that in the beginning, and had to work through it. But that's part of the learning, I suppose. And what a great thing it is. But the idea of the trust as well, and the holding of the space is something that I just think that the way in which you're describing it, Jess, to me is a wonderful way to capture the learning and the intention behind those activities. As you said, the way in which they were set up and framed, I wasn't there, but I presume it wasn't a big deal that now we're going to have a singing and we're all going to sing, because actually in a way that sort of puts that weight on it.
Exactly.
This weight of having to deliver, having to perform.
Exactly.
And I just wonder, at what point can we kind of just park that and just be?
Exactly. You know, there's something in the EYFS, or there was, about planned purposeful play. And in a sense, that's the antithesis of what play is about. You know, it's in many ways, it has to be this unplanned, spontaneous. And how do you set up? So, you know, if somebody was saying, oh, well, you know, I'd really like to adopt this as a training model for working, you know, I'd like to do this too. Let's just get everybody together and we'll just plan for play. It's not, there's some more subtleties to that.
You see what's missing there is the idea of authenticity. And I think you can't fake authenticity. And maybe that's something to take from this, from these experiences, is the idea that I would say that these were authentic. I mean, obviously I'm speaking as an outsider here, but I got the sense again from the reflections that there was an authenticity about this, that they valued it. You know, they weren't sort of pretending. They were, and that's where the awkwardness came in, because they had to go inside and be authentic in the space, and that takes a lot of doing. But that authenticity is probably something that might get sidelined when you're doing the plans, and when you're doing the lesson, and you're doing the portable template. And maybe that's something we need to consider. At what stage did we lose that connection with authenticity for all parties in the learning environment? Because it's one thing for the teacher to be authentic, the so-called teacher, let's call them the labels, but it has to be authentic for the learner as well. And I just wonder how often we can be sure of that particular ground.
Well, we were thinking as well. We had a chat previously about how knowledge is created in that kind of a play environment. During those play days, there wasn't a lot of talk. There wasn't a lot of talk about, you know, about it. The activity itself was where the knowledge and the understanding happened. So it was, in a sense, beyond words. It didn't need describing, because it was itself the knowledge generation. And actually, I don't know how you respond to that, Mary.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, because of course in this age of having to justify, you know, evidence-based for outcomes, delivery, all of that sort of discourse, if you like, how do we make a claim for the fact that there is knowledge being created, and if it's not being expressed in words or being demonstrated in words, well, it's a very fragile thing. So what is the knowledge? What is the content of the knowledge, and how might we know it? And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself, well, it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all format of knowledge, but it has to be meaningful. And I suppose that's where the authenticity feeds into the whole mix. But what counts as knowledge? And this is something I put back to you.
Yeah,
counts as knowledge in this environment, in this ecosystem, because we know about other forms of knowledge and how it can be recognized, or recognized, I suppose is the right word. But what counts as knowledge in your view in the activity?
Well, I think since we're exploring and seeking to understand how to be authentic, and that is a word that we, seeking to define, with children who we're encouraging to be playful and to be playing with us. The play itself is not discussed. Children's play is itself. The play itself is the learning. And I think, and that is for them, in a sense, the way that the knowledge about the world and being in the world and being part of the world and being of the world that is where that's all happening, within the play process itself. It might include words as part of the play, but it's not at a meta level talking about the play. Although children do that at a certain age. When they're younger, the play itself is so in a way, if we're going to be authentically playing as adults, do we benefit from talking a lot about it? Because that's adding words to talk about an experience that's about meaning through a process of motor, sensory, auditory. It's involving all these modes, which go, in a way, they're different to words, but we're undervaluing them, perhaps. We've become a very word-based society. That's how knowledge appears. Whereas we're talking about a different sort of knowledge of the world through being and doing in the world.
Yeah, no, there's an awful lot that we can learn from that, I think, and a lot that we've probably forgotten about in education. This idea of children and play, and that we don't have to. It doesn't have to involve much in order for it to be of value. But there's a little part of me thinking to myself, well, we're talking about this, of our own memory of being children, because that's the connection we have with what we're looking at. We're reminding ourselves that we were children once, but we're also interpreting, and this is a devil's advocate thing, and I'm trying to work it through myself. We're also, in a sense, interpreting what we see as children learning about themselves in the world as play, but then we're putting on top of that by playing, they are learning. But why are we calling it learning? It would be my question to myself, and maybe to yourself.
Because there's making creative decisions about things. There's critical thinking involved in the way that children are exploring and using loose parts together to discover something new. There's a lot of cause and effect, a lot of testing things out, a lot of which I think many people would say is evidence of learning. Yeah. So there's that experimentation, there's that opportunity to be actively involved in processes to kind of understand what those things do, and then role playing with others to explore relationships, to explore what it feels like to be angry, to explore what it feels like to get close to somebody. It's exploring different elements of being human in a way that is that is I think is part of a learning process. I think it is very much about that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And actually, you remind me as well of those wonderful play days. Are they the children playing in the garden, the sound garden, when you could actively see, you could almost hear them making decisions and making sense of the world and the prompts and the interaction with the adults, which was a beautiful thing to see. But just to go back to your point again, I'm just considering again the my role as devil's advocate stroke critical friend. Are we not putting still, the idea of looking for evidence of their playing, and now they're discovering, and so we're thinking, okay, they're moving out of, well, they're probably on a pathway that we may see towards learning that they don't necessarily see towards learning. That makes sense.
Of course. I mean, that's true of all education.
Yeah,
that is true of all learning outcomes. And, how do we know in a class, you say, this is my lesson plan, these are my aims, this is what the children will learn. How can you possibly say that that's what they're going to learn? They might be learning about what it's like to sit next to their friend. Yeah. They might learn about how they can poke their friend with a pencil and the reaction. Who knows what anybody's,
But the difference there is that they can be learning how to get how to do all sorts of things, or how to feel less than somebody else, all sorts of subliminal messages. But as long as, and this is probably one of the flaws of the system, is that as long as they demonstrate for us what we want them to demonstrate, so as long as they sing for us in tune, just to be with the music lesson hat on it for the moment, we don't mind whether they're actually miserable or they feel as if they're not as good as the next person, because that's not what we're looking for. We're just looking for, okay, they're mouthing, they seem to be singing in tune, they're watching me, they're stopping and starting, they're singing, they're developing, but all of the other stuff is not measurable. So I don't know where that leaves us in the conversation, but it's something that we both discussed before, and this idea, I suppose the tyranny of measurement is something that we probably want to talk about at some stage. Chip in just one other thing when it comes to me, the idea of, and I think we've also spoken about this before, Jess, the idea of how the system operates, and again, it's something that we've been born into. We're trying to work within it and make sense of it, which is not, when we're in it, which is also always challenging. But the early years foundation stage has kind of come in underneath the 5. The start at 5, and I think there's a wonderful opportunity here to underpin and indeed challenge the structure that we've inherited from the starting at 5 education system, and this idea of playful pedagogy has so much to offer. So all of the stages above it. So what I dream or imagine, what's so exciting about this project for me is that it has the potential to actually seep in and influence everything that goes on in the other stages. So this idea of creativity and just learning to be. At the moment, it probably happens in the latter half of when does it happen in the system? Because when they come into primary school, children are taught to socialize, they're taught to be, they're taught to model adult behaviors a lot of the time, you could say. But and then they have to unlearn that when they get into secondary school and learn to be creative, as if it's something completely new that's thrown at them. But we have the chance here to reimagine how that whole thing is structured.
Yeah.
So, do you have any views on how this project could actually do that? Because I think that's the next step, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, I just sort of going back a couple of steps in sort of anticipation of kind of somehow writing this project up, I started doing some reading, and I sort of put adult and play into a search engine, JSTOR, and got thousands of responses. And one of them was an interesting paper about a study with rats. So mammals, and they found that when rats had been isolated for 4 hours, they played more than rats who hadn't been isolated for 4 hours. When rats had been isolated for 24 hours, they played more than the rats who'd been isolated for 4 hours. So there's something about a need to play when you're kind of been on your own, and there's something that drives us to want to play. And there was also this paper suggested that they found that the early interactions between a mother rat and its pup could have lasting consequences for the sort of effective lives of rats as juveniles and as adults. So those, for example, that received more intimate contact, licking and grooming, they tended to be less fearful throughout their lives. And the paper ended up talking about as a mammal, whatever the mammal is, navigates through life, that it encounters novel and uncertain situations. And they suggested that those rats that were less fearful were better able to cope with novel encounters, and that being able to respond in this adaptive, flexible way isn't just useful for being a small pup. It was useful for the adult rat, and that they suggested that playful social interactions were thought to afford opportunities to develop flexible behavior strategies that are important to survival. Now that's a rat. So we're talking about, I think, play is absolutely fundamental to all mammals, let alone humans. And we are really depriving ourselves of important behavioral strategies for survival and for an uncertain future. For our, young people at the moment are facing an extremely uncertain future with AI coming in. We need to be preparing people to be creative, critical thinkers. And where it is really these things start is to know and understand about how to play and to do lots of it. So those countries where they have play and consider early childhood as being much longer than 0 to 5, but sort of right through to 8 years old, they have a large part of the day is based in these kind of creative, open-ended activities. Those children, such as in Finland, they are very successful when they reach to the age of 18. They score highly in terms of their well-being. There are great benefits to be derived from education systems that are based on sort of playful, open-ended kinds of activities. So what we're really needing is a complete shake-up of a system which is predicated on things that seem to be truths, but other countries don't necessarily see it the same way. But it's a big change that would be needed.
Yeah, but every change starts with one little footstep in that direction. But you've now prompted me to just look at how does that change happen, and it's not just the focus on the early childhood community, as in the children, but it's also the people who will be supporting them as they. The first people they see in that role of teacher or whatever, and so where does that change happen in the cycle? Because again, going back to the idea of this introduction of the 0 to 5 aspect in education, which can be seen as a really positive step. But there's the opportunity now to shape the way in which the adults can be prepared to enter that world of education. And I think what had struck me about the project was there's so many possibilities for taking aspects of what you did and somehow carving out a pathway to preparing people to become early years practitioners. That's not too.
Yeah. I think we have this sort of elements of a sort of a training, training model, and I know we don't necessarily want to get it as an accredited sort of module of learning or unit of learning or whatever, which might suck the life out of it. But I think, if we look at the different elements that we've explored, there's the sort of training days, there's the opportunity to go and observe practice, both, purely music practice, but also just to go and observe in a nursery, and then to prepare some kind of a provocation or something to take into the nursery and to try out and then to reflect. There are lots of elements there that add up together to be, actually, this is a sort of training course that could be expanded and be a unit of learning for an early childhood studies person that would like to explore creativity, or a music artist who would like to explore working with very young children. So I think there is the bones of it there.
Yeah. And the sort of person that you would want to be involved in that would be the practitioners that we saw on that project, who are prepared to take the risk, aware that they're out of their comfort zone, and that's okay, and ready to go on that sort of journey with you, and staying with that awkwardness and the not knowing.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. I mean, in a way, it takes us on to think about the basis of Magic Acorns as an organisation, because it's sort of it's sort of founded on that artistic practice that is open-ended and based in a sort of state of not knowing and uncertain outcomes, and the process being central to the practice, and working, seeing children as co-creators in an artistic process, so anything can happen. But we found along the way that we're working a lot with the sort of project model, going from funded project to funded project, that we've been missing out a little bit on something that's been very important, which is how to care for the artists in a project. And so we've been exploring seminal works like Nell Nodding's and Carol Gilligan's work on feminist ethics of care, and then Belle Fiore, who's recently written an article about those artists that are engaged in social impact, socially engaged practice, can be giving so much to their participants that actually nobody is caring for them. And I think that this ethics of care that underpins the approach that we're taking to practice is evidenced, I think, through the way that some of the mentees have felt supported and held and able to sort of stay with their awkwardness, because the project has got as an element this holding, this ethics of care. And I don't know if there's anything that you can say in relation to that.
Well, that seems to be, that would be a critical part of the success of certainly what I saw, because those practitioners, the vulnerability, and then being in the space is one thing, but then coming out of it and getting back into your persona, and then reflecting on what you've done, and perhaps not being completely comfortable, or perhaps feeling that you were exposed to something that you weren't ready for. All of that, can be quite detrimental, and could have probably, as you said, sucked the life out of that project. But it didn't, because those reflections were consistently seeking and rich with reflection. So whatever was happening, it worked. So in order to take that forward, I suppose, I think it's really important. A really important point that you raise is this idea of caring for those who are giving so much. In the nursing profession, you have compassion fatigue, don't you, where you're giving so much and actually you end up having nothing left in the tank, so to speak. So I guess you're talking about the same aspect here, and I wonder, is there something to be taken from the caring professions, the health sector? Is there a model there that?
We are exploring, actually, and this is with my Merrick hat on, but we are exploring the need perhaps for what music therapy have, which is supervision, and how we could, as an early childhood music area, learn how to perhaps offer supervision and support for one another. So that's something at the sort of bigger picture level. But I think that how we're managing it with this project is we've got the wonderful Sophie, who is here in the background with us today, even holding and supporting this space for us. You know, she has done that through 2 or 3 projects now. But what has to happen is that this has to be written into the funding bid. So this is how we're talking about how projects have to be sort of conceptualized, if you like, before they're even funded. They have to include this available funding for somebody who is seemingly doing nothing at all in terms of delivery, but actually is doing everything to support and hold the space. And it's a way of conceptualizing projects. That means that it's thought through from a caring point of view for all participants.
That's really interesting, because, you know, in recent times, say in the world of research, putting things through ethical committee, you know, research committees and so on, you'll always find reference to how if should there be any distress in the participants, where might you direct them for support? And there's always, you know, a go-to person or an organization, but it's now increasingly made explicit. And indeed, you even have it on the television when, you know, you may find some of these aspects distressing, and if you have a problem, we direct you to somebody. But it's quite a new thing in the area that you just outlined, the idea of the project itself, and I just wonder, is this new ground? Is this something that it could be actually taken on by the early childhood music sector, because it's so important? And if you're going to take this forward and really, you know, really hear the responses of say people to the projects, such as the idea of the vulnerability and the need to hold the space, then you've hit on something that is actually quite important, Jess. So yeah. I wonder, is there more work to be done on conceptualizing that very thing that you've mentioned?
I definitely think so, and I think it does fall into this sort of research category, because it's moving into ethics around research. So, you know, I feel that it's really important that early childhood music education gets researched properly. And yet there aren't a lot of research posts out there. I know people have an interest, and many, you know, there are many people that have an interest in early childhood. But I think, you know, we need to be encouraging practitioners to research their practice, but it needs to have ethical boundaries to it. So I think this is an area that is certainly in need of thinking through and thinking about. In addition, the project-based nature of early childhood arts projects means that the ethical dimension for the artist often just doesn't get considered. So I think there's 2 things. There's how we can be ethical in terms of practitioner inquiry, which is, you know, really important, and how we can have an ethics of care that can underpin projects, which means that projects don't always pay just for artists to deliver. It has to also include an element where there is somebody who is, and it's not a project manager, it's somebody who knows the work and understands and is right in amongst it, but is holding and managing and looking after the process, creative process. So I think there are two things that we really, you know, would be really valuable for us to explore further.
Yeah, that's really food for thought. I mean, I'd be surprised if other sectors hadn't already done that. Say, you mentioned, say music therapy. I don't know why I'm mentioning that, but I think we did mention it earlier. But I can't imagine that nobody has considered that. But maybe they haven't. Maybe that's the reality. But it certainly is the case that I think you've identified it here as an issue. And I think that would be a huge step forward.
Yeah. So we've sort of actually thinking a lot about what the legacy of this project could be. You know, we've sort of touched on several areas, haven't we? Which
I think there's something to do with. I mean, I know you say you don't want it to sort of become institutionalized or calcified, and why would you? I think that's absolutely. I think there's enough of that going on, so you don't want to do that. I completely get that. On the other hand, if this is to be portable and if it is to grow, and I do hope it does, because there's so much here that everybody can learn from. What's the best way to do that? And probably it is in some way reducing it down to as you said, a module or a course or an accredited program. But here's the challenge for us as educators: is there a way to do that doesn't suck the life out of it, or indeed the light out of it? There must be, surely, because if you are to do something with this, well, don't let precedent get in the way.
It's certainly something to think about, and you know, what are the non-negotiables, and can we draft something in such a way that these intangible and invisible and absolutely vital elements are retained, because it's beyond the wording, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So the focus is on the practitioner stroke teacher stroke leader stroke facilitator more than it is on the young child. Would that?
Oh yeah, because we're talking about a training program here.
Yeah,
you know, it's
but they're training for something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something to think about. I think it needs a wider conversation, but
yeah.
But I think, and actually, can I just put my hand up and say that I don't like the word training?
No, I don't either. Each time I say it, I'm saying it in inverted commas. Are we talking about formation? I mean, what are we talking about with this? What is it? What is this?
What, education? Education is.
Yeah.
Well, I love Gert Biesta's word, education, and now you do too. That could be a starting point. So yeah, I think there's lots of room for exploration on that one. I'd hate to see the project just because there's so much there that's just so thought provoking, and also was valued by the practitioners who come from all sorts of different backgrounds. So that in itself is, in my view, is evidence enough to say that this really needs we need to do something with this. You need to with this. But the point, as you say, is how do you do that by retaining the must-haves or the non-negotiables, and avoiding the path to calcification.
Yeah, exactly. Mary, thank you so much. It's these valuable, fruitful conversations are just so fantastic, and it's been amazing to have you as part of this, to kind of add your wisdom and insights to this project, which, it hasn't been a big project, but it's been so rich, and to have an additional critical friend layer has just added an amazing dimension. So thank you so much for being part of it.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who has allowed me to glimpse the fruits of your work. It's been just so thought-provoking, and I wish you and your team great success in the next steps. But thank you. It's an incredible honor to have been a part of this journey. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye for now.